Hi everyone, I'm Braga Olga de Silva. Welcome to Older Queer Voices podcast. Today's episode is on grief and loss. Older queer people carry deep and often unspoken stories of grief, from losing partners and chosen family to health crises like HIV/AIDS, cancer, dementia, as well as the layered grief of societal rejection, silencing, or watching entire communities disappear. Many older LGBTQ people grieved in silence due to stigma, lack of legal recognition of relationships, and societal shame. This episode of Older Queer Voices is a space to explore how grief shows up in our lives and our communities, not just through bereavement, but also through isolation, displacement, and the loss of cultural memory. Today, we'll be joined by Simon Blake, CEO of Stonewall, and Rachel Bret, CEO of the Sussex Beacon, to reflect on personal and professional experiences of grief and to discuss the early vision for a new LGBTQ plus inclusive hospice being developed in Brighton. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks very much. Nice to be here.
Nice to see you again. And welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Raga. Nice to be here too.
So wonderful to have two wonderful humans on my guest. And as Simon, I'm going to start with you. Today's topic is a little bit dark, and I know that, and it is deliberate because we don't really talk about death and dying and grief and loss much, isn't it? And so we'll go deeper into it. Why do we not, and why should we speak about grief and loss? So, Simon, my first question is: can you please share more about yourself, of course, and your relationship with grief and loss?
Sure. So I'm Simon Blake, and I'm Chief Executive of Stonewall, the LGBTQ plus charity. And I started work in HIV in the 90s, and I have worked in the social sector all the way through. So have been involved in the Children Bereavement Network and various elements to do with death and dying over many years. I guess it really came into my personal life when my brother died unexpectedly a decade ago, and then my friend died by suicide, a close friend a couple of years later, then my mum, and then my dad, all in quick succession. So probably had greater proximity to death and dying than I would have liked in the last decade or so, let alone the animals in my life, which I think is often an unspoken piece to do with grief. And yes, sometimes it can be deep and dark, but the other side of it is there's also an awful lot of light and love that comes from death and dying and grief, because without death and dying, without grief, without bereavement, then we would find it much more difficult, I think, to make sense of life. So I think it's just really important to have that sort of reminder that that dark and light often sit right next to each other. And I wouldn't want us to lose the light which comes with loving and hurting and grieving.
Simon, that's such a positive take on grief and loss, and we'll talk more about this. But thank you, and really sorry for your loss over the last decade. And Rachel, same with you. Can you share a little bit more about yourself and also your relationship with grief and loss?
Hi. Yes, I'm Rachel Bret, and I'm the CEO of the Sussex Beacon. And the Sussex Beacon is based in Brighton and was set up over 30 years ago as a call to action to respond to the AIDS pandemic. It was built by the LGBTQ plus community and allies to respond to, I guess, the rejection and fear in communities in the time. As people recall, it was a very dark time where there was a lot of fear, a lot of hatred, and the obviously mainly directed at the gay men's community, MSN community, who were at the brunt of the AIDS pandemic as it was in those dark days. So obviously professional relationship to the Beacon is one that was obviously started in a time when people were dying in huge numbers, and managing AIDS-related illnesses that they you know, some obviously sadly many of them died from, but a lot of them, some of them survived and then lived with very chronic conditions, and those are some of the people that are still alive, thankfully, in our services. And you know, HIV has treatment has obviously hugely improved. People can live well and live a normal lifespan, but the people that we work with at the Sussex Beacon, the people that we support and that we care for, have been living with HIV for decades, and as a result of that have taken all the very toxic treatments in order to survive, which has impacted on their health. But I think one of the things that is just as damaging is the stigma of living with HIV, alongside some of the kind of stigmas and shames that people have experienced, especially older queer people, around their sexuality, their gender, and them having to hide their authentic selves on a daily basis. Personal relationship to grief, you know, being of an age now where I am experiencing close friends dying, parents passing. I think we always want to focus on the person as they're alive, and having a good death is so important, isn't it? Because that's the you want people to move on to wherever, in a pain-free and positive way as possible, and you don't want your last memories of them to be you know, them suffering, and like Simon, I've lost someone to suicide, and lost friends that should be still here now because they were very young. So yes, but yes, you know, death is also about life, and life should be celebrated. And there is no greater celebration at the Beacon, because a lot of the people that come here did think their diagnosis was a death sentence, and they're still here today.
Wow, thanks, Rachel. And I'll come back to you, of course, on and delve deeper into it. Simon, just coming back to you, we talk about HIV and AIDS at this point, and I know you said that you lost, you know, few family members in very quick succession. So, how do you did you lose close family and close friends during the AIDS epidemic? That's one, and two is how did you deal with this grief and loss?
So I am just actually at the age where I just missed that sort of first wave of people, you know, of people of the same age dying. So if I look to people who are 5, 6, 7 years older, that lots and lots of their friends and peers died. So at that stage, it was really more professional relationship rather than friendships. I have, over the last few years, have people who have been living with HIV who have died, but I didn't have that real intense experience, which many of my friends and colleagues have had, of losing numbers of people, you know, in quick succession. And I'm always struck by, you know, that resilience that was shown during that time, that absolute determination to make a difference and to do something differently, and to insist that the NHS treated people differently. You know, whether that was the UK coalition, whether that was Body Positive, whether that was local support groups like the Sussex Beacon, people who are saying, you know, we need to be treated with dignity and respect, and we need to have proper care, proper investment in treatment and support, and all the time doing that whilst providing care and support for people. And, you know, Dan Savage talks about, you know, burying friends in the morning, protesting in the afternoon, and dancing all night. And the quotes which then goes on to say, and of course it was the dance we were fighting for. You know, it really was that sense. And if anybody hasn't seen It's a Sin, yeah, that program by Russell T Davies is a really important docudrama about that period of time where, you know, where love and pain and joy and hurt live so close next to each other. And I don't think we should ever underestimate the power and intensity of that. But you know, as I say, I was just that sort of just young, just that bit younger. But know that it has lived with a lot of people. So when I talk to some people since I started at Stonewall, one of the things that has really struck me when people talk about their lives is that pain at losing a lot of friends, and also as people moving into older age. I think we forget how young people were. So when I look to my one of my best friend's uncle, he was 26. When I think about one of the people I was mentoring, he was 28. When I think back to the people when we used to be in Cardiff at Body Positive, people dying in their early, mid, late 20s, early 30s. And so as we all, faced with a second phase of life, which, I very much think about this sort of next phase for me. I think sometimes we think about, what's happened. I think about my friend who died in a car accident when I was 17 and think, what would their life, have been like? And you think about the aunts and the uncles and the other friends that along the way. So I've heard a lot from people talking about, what would life have been like for them, but also for us, had our friendship group survived intact. And we have to find ways to honour that and remember that, and to ensure that we take that bit of history, into from our community in particular, into the future.
But Simon, thanks for that. But how do you manage grief? When you're faced with grief, like you said, your brother, you lost your brother, then your mom, and then your dad, and of course you talked about pets as well. But how do you cope with that kind of grief?
Differently at different stages, I think is the really important thing to say. So when my brother died, it was very unexpected, and he was 45, and I at the time didn't know that I'd lost my capacity to make decisions. But with hindsight, I lost my capacity to make decisions in context of work. I found the simplest of things quite difficult to do for a short period of time, and then I occupied myself doing things which were more complex than I probably needed to occupy myself with doing things. And a little bit like any difficult circumstance, that you can often find yourself being ping-ponging around. There's a moment where you want to be distracted, where you're in absolutely good spirit, and then the moment when you're in tears, and that changes on a daily basis. I then was incredibly lucky when Mum was dying. We had some warning. It was COVID. I was able to live there. I was able to be there right the way through, and she died at home. And so something about that process, which the process was gorgeous, even though the end result isn't, but it was also, she was in the right age group, still young, actually, in the whole scheme of things, but at least it was the natural order, if that's the right thing to say. And then Dad was unexpected, but he had grieved since Mum had died, and he wanted to die. He was very clear he wanted to die. So he took some salvation and some happiness from the fact that even if I didn't want to be alone as the only person in my nuclear family, that Dad was where he wanted to be, and he had different beliefs about what happens after death, but that's a whole different conversation. So I don't think there is one way of dealing with it, but what I do know is that I actually feel incredibly lucky in that my mum and dad were always very straightforward about death, right from the beginning, and very clear that that none of us could live forever, that the important thing was to make the best use of the time that you had. I was always incredibly lucky that even when I came out, there were some challenges because it was the 90s, but I always knew that I was loved and that we would get to the other end of that. So for me, most of my grief has been fairly uncomplicated. It has been yearning for, grieving for something which I've lost but have always loved. Where I think it is more complicated is where you have all sorts of other thoughts about regret and shame and guilt and loss about what you missed. And I guess the closest that I came to that was when my brother died. He had 2 children and a grandchild. and I don't. And so if you take that experience of being, I was thinking, I guess in some ways thought I was more disposable. And of course, no one's worth is measured in children and grandchildren, but he lived closer to my parents. So was much more involved in the day-to-day life of them. And he had a young child and a slightly older child and a very young grandchild, of course, for whom all of that sort of sense of needing. And I remember feeling, well, I dreamt a lot. I had a horrible recurring dream, which was that I put him in a box and pushed him out to sea, and he put me in a box, but kept on holding onto the rope and pulling me back. And it was, clearly that was my subconscious trying to make sense of the fact that I hadn't been able to do enough to save my brother from dying. So I don't know, how do you cope? Friends, doing things you love, one step at a time, suddenly realizing that actually you're really singing to the music in the car rather than just nodding your head. And as you, I feel very lucky with my brain, but as you experience it more, it's a bit like when you split up, isn't it? When you first split up from a partner, you don't think you'll ever laugh again. Once you've been through the cycle once or twice, you know that, yes, there'll be difficult periods, but you hold on to hope and you expect there to be a moment where it doesn't feel like it's quite as painful as it was the day before. I guess I would just say one other thing, which might be controversial, but I do sometimes think that we don't talk enough about the feeling of love and the feeling of joy and the ability to accept and acknowledge that somebody has died, and also not to feel the constant missing of them. So do I think about my mum, brother and dad every single day? Yes. But can I make that sound as though it's a very deep and pensive thought every single day? Yes, I could. Would that be the truth? No. Sometimes it's a passing thought. Sometimes it is a deep, visceral pain. But for the majority of life, it is just acknowledging and rebuilding, and some of it's habit. So how do you get move on from habits which are no longer available or serving you, and all of those kind of things?
Do you think we stop grieving, Simon, at any point?
I don't know the honest answer. If grieving is a process, probably not. So my partner was in Cornwall last week, and every time I spoke to him, I wanted to say, "Have you seen Dad?" So that was a process of knowing, and Dad's been dead less than a year, so that's sort of breaking some of those habits and expectations. If we grieve forever, is grieving always painful? I would say no. I think that grief and I'm not. I don't know. According to some people's definition of grief, I don't think that I will grieve in that way forever, because I have loss and I recognize the whole, but I don't feel as though there is a pain that will always be associated. That said, when I just started talking about Dad, I didn't expect my voice to well up, and I felt it well up. So who knows? I think none of us are experts, are we? But the bit about all of this is how do we talk about those experiences? And brilliant that you are talking about it here, so that we can share and we can learn and we can console, because so much as with most of life, the things we don't talk about are harder because we don't talk about them. Where there is shared experience, where there's commonality, where we understand what is happening, where we're able to say, that scared me, that frightened me, it didn't worry me, it didn't upset me like it wanted. The reason that I deliberately said it doesn't always feel painful is that lots of people feel guilty about that, because they believe the discourse is that it's always got to hurt, or they've always got to say, yes, it's absolutely painful. So we probably do always grieve, if grieving isn't always painful, because if grief is about loss and about holes, sometimes you can't ever fill a hole. And there is an image, isn't there, of the hole doesn't get smaller, your world grows bigger around it. I'm not sure I completely agree with that. I think the hole does get a little bit smaller, or maybe it just gets overgrown. Who knows?
Yeah. Interesting, because death in my community, in my culture, we don't talk about death. It's another list of taboos and stigma that is attached to it. You talk about death, that means you're manifesting death and it's going to happen. And then you get blamed and you get judged for even have said the word death. So it's very interesting. And a friend of mine a few years ago lost her only child, and suddenly through an allergic reaction. And a month later, she was sharing photos of her partying and having a good time, and people, I just saw how so many people judged and said, what, you're a mom grieving, this doesn't look like you're grieving. But that
Yeah,
was her way of managing that pain. And
yeah,
I think one of the things that I have learned from that whole experience is not to judge other people, how they live or how they choose to manage their pain in any way. And no, but that's really interesting. I'm going to come back to you, Simon, very soon on talking about grief, of course, in our community. How do we manage grief in our community? But before that, Rachel, I just wanted like a really simple question, because I've worked with Hospice New Zealand when I was in New Zealand for several years. So I was in the management, and I saw a lot of people in different hospices going through palliative care and then saying goodbye. One, what is a hospice? What is the difference between hospice and palliative care? And who first of all recommends that they get sent to a hospice? And is there a criteria? And what happens next?
That is, I don't think there's a simple answer to that question. And so I'm new to the hospice world. I've been in this job for just over a year, and I think the Sussex Beacon is a very unique example of hospice care that perhaps doesn't quite fit with a traditional hospice model. The Beacon is, I think, probably one of the last HIV specialist providers of hospice care. And as I alluded to when we spoke before the programme started, currently our hospice clinical offer is dormant because we're in this negotiation with the NHS, so that's something to the side. However, the Beacon hospice offer, or we talk about end of life and palliative care. So the Beacon's focus has as HIV care and support and medication has evolved, the Beacon has had less need to focus on the end of life component of people who are living with HIV. Of course, we do that end of life care, but it's not isn't the majority of the focus of the work that we do. Our focus has been on that palliative care, and we're very unique. And the people who live with HIV, in many ways, probably get the best health care around their condition than a lot of people with other chronic life-limiting conditions, with their regular checkups and very specialist services, particularly in Brighton. And I know it's very different elsewhere in the country where there is less resource. So I think what the Beacon has done in terms of its palliative offer has been available from diagnosis to people to use and to respond to the changing healthcare needs of people who live with HIV locally. As I said earlier, we have people living with HIV who've lived with HIV with decades. Speaking with some of our service users, they say, "Oh, they didn't even have a name for it when I was diagnosed. It was such a scary time for them." So what the Beacon does with a very integrated, multi-agency, multidisciplinary group of professionals in healthcare and in social care, it leans in to support people who often don't have a lot of support around them. As we referred to earlier, a lot of our cohort lost their friends. It's a very traumatized community, and because of stigma and shame around HIV, people don't access healthcare, other healthcare provision. So we played a really important role in their lives in keeping people well, keeping them living their best lives around illness. And people who are on our books, our service users, our patients, have multiple illnesses, and often they've come to us, and it's not necessarily anything to do with their HIV, but it's the other conditions that they need help and support with, as well as the physical presentations. There is also a lot of mental health need around some of our service users, and some of our service users also have lifestyle needs that we will help them with around substance misuse and alcohol. So we are quite unique in that we provide this continuum of care, and we will offer that care at touch points throughout their lives, throughout their condition, within a wraparound of services. So in that respect, it's very unique, whereas a traditional hospice perhaps focuses at that, not necessarily end of life, because end of life means the last year of life, but towards the more, as illness progresses and more support is needed. And I think where our community, our HIV community, and obviously that is a very diverse community. There are members in that community who don't have home care, family, friends around them, or friends and family that may have the resources to provide care at home. And what is common with the hospice movement is that also we provide that respite care and support, so that families can have that time, that break away from dealing with illness, or with the manifestation of mental health and illness together as people struggle. And with the Sussex Beacon's offer as well, we have provided a lot of support to our HIV community around medication changes, adherence problems that people have to their medication, and work really closely with our local HIV clinic, the Lawson unit, who provide our clinical oversight. So it is a very unique place, and I believe it is a model of good practice that I think other parts of the healthcare system should be looking at as a trailblazer that has been kept a very big secret, really, because as we know, the focus of healthcare is moving from acute hospitals into community and being better integrated across health and social care. The Sussex Beacon's been doing that for years, and I think the rest of the world is catching up with us in terms of a hospice offer. And we're very privileged because we have this very tight community of people we care for. But what we want to do moving forwards is, and I think probably one of the reasons why you've invited me here today, is to open up that offer to an LGBTQ plus community, because we have the ability and the knowledge and the understanding of through what we've learned as an organisation over those years of how people find interfacing with healthcare providers challenging because of discrimination, because of stigma, because people will feel judged. And I think, you know, talking to service users here, you know, that is very much still the case, sadly, outside of our very safe and supportive HIV community. And I think COVID was a good example of where that sense of fear came up again when patients were going, for instance, to get COVID jabs, and were say, you know, questions, why are you here? You know, you don't look old enough, you know, you're not in the 75 category and above category, and then having to explain, I've got, you know, I live with HIV, and the sudden, oh, let me go and ask somebody, let me put double gloves on, those sorts of things that they experienced.
Sure. So thanks, Rachel. And in my experience, I'm going back to New Zealand again. When I visited the hospices, there were beds. So they would be referred by a GP or a doctor saying that they need palliative care or they need end of life. And there would be beds provided to them, and then they would be moved in there and till the end of their, you know, lifetime. So how does it work here at Sussex Beacon? Is it similar?
Well, given that we're not open, I can talk to what we used to do.
Yeah, used to, yeah.
So yes, exactly the same. I mean, GP referral, community nursing, acute hospital trust, HIV clinic referral, referral from drug and alcohol agencies, all those pathways absolutely in place. But I think one of the most brilliant things that the Sussex Beacon has done and did is self-referral. So patients being in control of their own healthcare needs and feeling that, you know, and giving them the opportunity to refer themselves into the Sussex Beacon. Of course, a clinical assessment would have to take place around that, but there is a real sense of self-determination in respect of that people can be in charge of their own health and feel in control of their own health, and feel able to ask for help and know what they need as well. And I think that's really important, because people are their own experts, and certainly people living with HIV are definitely their own experts in what they need.
Sure. Simon, coming back to you, you know, I just want to come back on the grieving part of it. So do you think that grief looks or feels different for our community, the LGBTQ community, especially the older generation? And, you know, and I'll just give you some context to this. I do a lot of conversations with older people, not just because of my podcast, but because of where I live as well, tonic housing. And I've observed that care homes, especially the stories that people talk about the abuse in care homes and our healthcare system, is very difficult and challenging for many people. So do you think that when we go into a healthcare system where there is discrimination, there is obviously no sensitization sometimes, you know, healthcare professionals come from parts of the world where there is homophobia or lack of understanding. So do you think we lose a part of ourselves? Because I also know that there are people who have had to de-gay, who have lost their identities when they put into care homes or healthcare space, and also people who have been dead named, they've lost their complete identity. So do you think that we grieve that? And do you think that grief feels differently for us in our community?
I think there are definitely particular circumstances that could do, and I just want to, I guess, start with people we talk about chosen family a lot, and when it comes to death and dying and bereavement and loss, certainly if you look in the context of workplace policies, that often there's a hierarchy of loss, and it's parent, sibling, child, maybe grandparents, and that sense of have a couple of days off and then come back into work. So we've got an outdated model of understanding bereavement and loss and grief generally, which doesn't suit anybody, would be my sort of my thesis hypothesis on that. And then you think about chosen family and the fact that it may well be an ex-partner. It may well be a friend who helped you through a particular period of time. May well be somebody who, according to the traditional understanding, has absolutely no connection to us, and that's a really important thing for us to really hold true. It's almost one of those phrases which either you don't understand it at all, or you really understand it, and somehow we've got to, I think, make it something that everybody really understands, that the people that we love, the people who are important to us, our chosen family, significant in life and significant in death. So that's certainly one thing. And the only bit that I would just add to that, I'm still very close to my ex-partner, who we split up 21 years ago. And sometimes people think that is very odd. So, what does your husband think of that? Well, nothing, as far as I'm aware. It certainly doesn't cause any problems. And if he thinks something of that, then perhaps I should have a view on him still being friends with his 3 ex-partners, and all of those sorts of bits. So, luckily, our experiences of the world are not binary. Our experiences of the world are sometimes a bit messy. And that is as beautiful in living as it is complex, and as beautiful in death as it is complex. So yes, absolutely. And then, of course, there is discrimination within healthcare and social care. And I have a friend who said not only there was abuse, but before that, even, there was a complete disregard for their relationship. And it was so much easier to pretend that relationship wasn't an intimate relationship than it was to deal with the pain and hurt of trying to navigate their way through in a relationship. And that's shocking. It is a shocking indictment. It takes nothing to acknowledge people's experience, and particularly in the caring professions. And we have to move through that. That isn't about money. That is about attitudes and values and induction and training and all of those sorts of things. And quite honestly, we're all entitled to our own beliefs and opinions, but when we are paid to do a role, and that role is caring, then we have to care for people regardless of whether we believe with the choices they make or with their life experiences and who they are. We don't get to pick and choose and say we provide excellent healthcare or care for people as long as they meet my version of good enough or nice or moral, whatever language you want to use. And then, if there has been complication with family, if there has been complication with end of life, if there's been discrimination within healthcare settings or within the care settings, if you haven't been able to crawl into bed next to the person you love as they were dying, as many people can, or to hold their hand as you sit in the grounds of the hospice, as heterosexual people can, then of course, that makes it much more complicated to grieve, because if I guess I'm trying to imagine myself into that situation, but if I wasn't able to be fully there as my husband died, and then they died, I would give that responsibility to me. I wouldn't in that moment be thinking it was about the environment and the condition. I would be thinking that I wasn't good enough, strong enough, brave enough, courageous enough to be able to do what was necessary. And that inevitably impacts on the way that you grieve and think and understand. So, and when I think about friends, who've been rejected or accepted as long as they don't take their partner home or whatever it is, again, all of those things will impact on the way that people grieve. And that's why I said at the beginning, I feel very privileged that even though I have had more loss than I want, it's all been uncomplicated because there has been love, all of the way through. And for too many people in our community, that just isn't the case for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, because there are so many different ways of so many different losses, right? We're talking about not just death and bereavement, but we're talking about, I know someone who's in their 70s, been with their partner for over 40 years, and now their partner has Alzheimer's, form of dementia, and they're watching them lose themselves. And that is such a hard thing for them to watch. And when she narrates the stories, it's really difficult for us to listen to as well. So we all in this grieving together for a loss, which is very difficult. Have you experienced anything like that, Simon?
Around the Alzheimer's and dementia,
Yeah.
And I haven't experienced personally, but I do know somebody who had talked about their partner having dementia, and then also becoming fearful of their partner. So recognizing them, but being fearful that they would be found out. So going back to a time within society where stigma, and they hadn't been able to be open about their relationship. But yeah, these are all the complexities, aren't they, which people are navigating on a basis across society. It's then when you've got the added level of stigma and shame and prejudice and fear and guilt that goes with that that creates all sorts of additional problems, and maybe the support mechanisms that you might rely on for other things you can't rely on in order to help you through this grief, because people don't recognize your gender identity or your sexual orientation, or haven't valued your partner. I have friends whose family have created all sorts of problems because they didn't set up the will properly, and so next of kin and all those things, and all that life administration and bureaucracy, which all of us, well, many of us will put off. Actually, it's really, really important when our lives are not as society might expect it to be, to determine our wishes and our intentions, whether that's the sentimental piece of jewelry, or whether it is your life belongings, or whatever it is. We need to be able to be clear and use the systems which enable to protect those who care for us and have loved us while we're alive, so that your wishes are fulfilled when we die.
That's such a important point you have just raised, Simon, because episode 2 of Older Queer Voices, we focused on paperwork and how important it is. We said legal matters, how important it was. I was shocked. We just did an online survey, and we found that 99% of people did not even consider that thought. They didn't even think about paperwork. They thought, automatically I'm married, or I'm in a civil partnership. If something happens, then I will automatically, as the partner spouse, get everything, all the assets in my name. No, it doesn't happen that way. And also, like you said, dead naming, and making sure that when something happens to you, you can choose your own care homes, for instance. There have been instances, as we know, Ted Brown's case as well, partner abuse. So interesting. Please watch episode 2. I'm just trying to give a plug in because it's really, really important, especially in times today when we have blended families. We have our relationships are far more complex than a heterosexual relationship. Often, I'm not saying all, sometimes. And so we need to protect our loved ones, and not just ourselves, but our loved ones as well. I'm going to come back to you, Rachel. I'm just going to come back. I'm very curious about this hospice, because all this time when we were having conversations within our community, people would say, gosh, I wish there was a place that I could take my partner to, like a hospice, where I know for a fact that they will not be discriminated, they will be treated well, they will be given respect and dignity that they deserve. And now we have something that is going to be launched soon, or that's going to come up soon. So what are some number of needs that you identified that prompted this vision?
As I said, I think it's being new to the sector. I think I just came in and went, why aren't we doing this? We've been on a journey with our local NHS ICB in kind of understanding and unpicking what is unique about the Sussex Beacon. And of course, the uniqueness is about being a place of acceptance and safety. And that is because of all the stigma associated with HIV, but all the intersectional characteristics that our diverse population often come with. So I suppose when you're thinking about health inequalities and the LGBTQ plus community is up there, of people who aren't accessing, who are underserved, who are not understood, who experience barriers, who experience some of the biases and discriminations that you've described. And I'm just thinking, well, these are our people. These are the patients of the Sussex Beacon. So let's open up our services and provide them with a place of safety in the same way that we provide a place of safety for people living with HIV. And it just felt like a natural evolution of who we are. The Beacon was that call to action. We were built by the LGBTQ plus community, and it's about giving back to the Beacon. The Beacon is theirs. It is that the community's place of safety and sanctuary and care and acceptance when you need it most, and it just made sense. And our workforce embodies our community. You come here and you see people who you can identify with, who have the same cultural background as you, the same kind of touch points that you have. We will respect your pronouns. We will respect who you want to be, your authentic self, and we will make sure when you cannot perhaps do the things that you would do to kind of affirm yourself in that identity, we will help you do it for you. We had a very sad case of a trans woman who came here discharged from hospital with a full beard, so distressed and distressing for us as well, and just it's those small things that we can do very, very easily, because it is part of our natural DNA, and I guess that is why it felt like the right thing to do, the obvious thing to do in many ways. But it's a challenge. It is. We are, I guess, stepping into new territory. We are also requiring to be mindful of our HIV patients, service users who aren't from the LGBTQ plus community. We have we have a high proportion of heterosexual people here. We have a lot of, I suppose people have this assumption, still this old assumption that HIV is something that gay men, MSM, have. It's not. Half of our service users are women. We have a lot, probably about 40% of our service users are not British. A high proportion of our service users are migrants. So we are a very, very diverse community. And I think, that has helped, that our heritage, our legacy has helped us embrace all people where they are. And I think that's, we are working with the NHS. It's an ambition, but we have a long way to go. And I think that, along with the good news story, you're getting people going, well, why do they need it? And, there is a lot amongst all the joy and the positive affirmation of what we're trying to achieve. There's also an undercurrent of I don't know, hate, maybe, that we're having to manage and negotiate. But I think when we jointly announced the news with our ICB, the overwhelming feedback on our social media is, oh my God, why haven't we had this before? Or I thought you already did that.
Even I Googled and I said, what? Is this the first one?
Yeah,
it's a surprise.
Well, I don't know whether we're the first. I think we probably are, but certainly with the combination with the HIV specialism, because that is our roots and we're not going to lose that. But and we've done a lot of consultation with our service users as well, because I think it's important that they come on this journey with us, and even if they're not part of the LGBTQ plus community, it's that community that accepts them in their HIV sort of service user identity. It's been quite a roller coaster, to be honest.
I'm sure. When does it get operational?
That's a good question. Again, we are working with NHS Sussex. There are some significant there's a few capital investments that we need to make on this building to open it up again to a standard that is required. So yeah, as I said, it's the ambition, it's the destination, and I think we have a lot to kind of celebrate. It is an amazing concept, good news story, but we are operating in a horrendous operating environment at the moment, where there's a lot of change and churn that we are kind of navigating our way through.
Sure. Are we expecting it in 2025 or 26 or any
26,
idea?
26.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Simon, I'm going to come back to you. And you talked about death and how we need to celebrate death. And before we close, I just want to talk about this concept of death and dying. Why is it important for us to talk about it? Because as you know, where I live, there are older people and they don't talk about death here. I mean, I've tried very hard to get people in and say, let's talk about it. It's a reality of our life. But there is a lot of fear around talking about death. And why should we celebrate that, Simon?
So I think obviously not everybody who dies is old. Unfortunately, we know that. But if you think about sort of the natural, sort of normal, usual, whatever language you want to use around our life journey, we're not very good at thinking about about children and young people and celebrating children and young people. We're not brilliant at celebrating older people either. So it sort of feels like there's a magic bit in the middle where we're seen as fully functioning human beings, and so for me there is something really important about intergenerational conversations, how much we can learn, how much we can understand. I used to see a woman called Mrs. O'Brien every Sunday when I was between 9 and 18 when she died. I learned a lot about life from those conversations, and I was absolutely fascinated by what she'd learned, what she'd experienced, what she believed, what had been the obstacles, what had been the joy. And I still now, 33 years after she died, will sometimes think, what would Edith do? Because it was such a rich and important part of my experience. So I think there is something which I would just say before we talk about why should we be really celebratory and thinking about death and dying, we need to get better at thinking about different generations and what can we learn and teach each other all the way through different parts of life. And then for me, talking about death and dying and recognizing that we are going to die does actually really bring into sharp relief that we've only got, in my view, we've only got one life. And certainly in the way that I think about life, even if there is something afterwards, it's not this life. And so in that, what does it mean to be a good citizen? What's it mean to try to make a difference in the world? What's it mean to play our part and in being part of community? And so all of that comes into really sharp relief if we start thinking about the fact that we won't be here forever, that we've got choices that we make with the time that we spend, and those choices we make need to be good for us and for those people around us. And then if we do not really think about celebrating people who've been alive, if we don't have those rituals, if we don't talk about it, then it becomes an abstract and difficult and more complicated process. For me, it just feels, when I think about the number of conversations I've had with people about my own experiences and with other people about their experiences, in which that rich exchange has been incredibly important. Julie Bentley and I edited a book about the death of a sibling, because people tended not to talk about Andrew to me. They would talk about how my mum and dad were. And of course I cared how my mum and dad were. All of my energy was going into how mum and dad were. And they were thinking about how I was when they had energy outside of that. But I wanted to scream at times. What about me? I've lost my older brother. I'm untethered, in relation to where I've been. And we brought together people who'd all experienced the death of a sibling. So there'd been, physical death because of medical conditions, death because of accidents, death because of suicide, and all sorts of different experiences. And just seeing them written down gave me a new perspective. And I know from the reviews and from the conversations that we've had with other people, it also gave other people an understanding that it's okay to feel really self-centered and yet also be wanting to make sure that you're supporting your parents. It's okay to want to shove your head under the cover and believe that you'll never want to get up again. And those are normal, natural processes. And like everything, the more we share our human experiences, the more that we help ourselves and we help others. For me, it's as simple as that. And that has to be about the joyful things, and as well as it does about the difficult things. And if we don't talk about death and dying and understand it as an inevitable part of life, then as far as I know, talking about death does not make it happen. Although saying that, I do know that sometimes when I think, gosh, in the last 10 years, my brother, my mum and dad have all died, I sometimes think, what do I say if my partner died as well? And of course that's completely irrational, but life is irrational at 3 a.m. sometimes. But I know that there are other people who also think that, because I've had some of those conversations as well. So I mean, we're peculiar, aren't we, all of us, in our own beautiful, imperfect, perfect way. And the more that we can share that and talk about that and voice that, the better it is. Because, in the same way that often we thought we were only gay in the village, we sometimes think we're only bereaved in the village, even though the evidence all around us is that there is something very different about that. And so for me, let's talk about it. Let's just remove the stigma. Silence, as far as I know, has never helped anyone.
Sure. And we're going to share some resources as well on Nicola will share a PDF of all the resources if you're feeling unwell, or if you're grieving, you're feeling there's a personal loss that you are facing right now. Whatever it is, we've got a slide going there. Now, just before we end, Rachel, I just wanted to ask you, this is my personal curiosity, okay? It's a personal question. Hospice and palliative care is a place where dying happens, whether we like it or not, right? And I know you've been in this role only for a year. Why did you choose this space, this industry?
I think I chose the Beacon, and the Beacon chose me. I think this job opportunity came at a time where I was looking for a huge change in direction in terms of career. I'd spent my entirety of my career working in children and young people services. And when I came here, I just felt that I'd found my tribe, that I'd found people with a similar value base, and a connection as well with the service users that I hadn't had for a long time. And I think that's really important in reminding you every day while you come to work. And I think you can be in jobs, and certainly my previous job, that are so distant from service users, and you'd have to make a real consistent effort to try and make that connectivity. And here that that it's all around me, the reason why I come to work every day, and I battle away at trying to get us one step further towards where we want to be in achieving our new strategic vision, in getting the our clinical provision back up and running for our HIV cohort and our new offer, our newly evolved offer to people from the LGBTQ plus community. So, and I think that it's exciting. This is exciting. It's new. It will make a difference, a very, very tangible and real difference to people's lives. And I think that that is the Beacon's attraction. It does do that. It does do that.
We wish you all the best, Rachel. And final words, Simon, Rachel, Simon, final words before we log off.
So I just wanted to really just say how important the hospice movement is in the UK. The knowledge and understanding around how to make the end of life and death and supporting people through bereavement is just second to none. And it's one of those areas of our health and care service which we just don't talk about enough, because we don't talk about dying enough. So that palliative care, end of life sort of bit, and having worked with Hospice UK as part of the Dying Matters campaign, really saw firsthand how important that is. I guess, what would my final word be? Let's use the fact that we will all die to think about how we live, and not be afraid to talk about dying, because if we're afraid to talk about dying, then we might also not be making the most of living.
Wow, that's really wise. Someone asked me on one of the podcasts where I was a guest, saying, what would you like to be written on your gravestone? And I'm still thinking, I don't know.
I'd love to be doing, he danced well. He didn't dance well, but he tried.
Brilliant. And Rachel, you, final words? And
yeah, I mean, I can only echo what Simon has said. That the hospice movement plays such an important role in our healthcare system, and I think it has so much more to offer our transforming NHS, and it is a pleasure and a privilege to be part of that transformation and to evolve how hospices can be in the future, in particular for people who don't ordinarily have access to hospice care. And I think some of the people who we work with don't have the resources or the wherewithal to navigate themselves into a hospice. And obviously, if people's experience of healthcare is one of slight trepidation and fear about how they're going to be received, then we want to change that as well, and to be a place of safety for people from the community to come with their loved ones, whoever they may be, however they might identify, and come and die in peace as themselves.
That sounds very, very profound and wonderful. I hope I never have to use a hospice, but if I had to, I hope to come to Sussex Beacon, Brighton. Okay, but thank you both. What an insightful hour. And I just realized we've gone over our 1 hour. Thank you. Really, I'm just still mesmerized by all the wisdom that I've heard today. So, Simon, thank you for sharing wisdom, of course, and sharing your vulnerabilities. And I've heard you before at Tonic Housing, and I think you speak so wonderfully. I have the highest respect for you, and I hope we keep having these conversations. We keep talking about things that we feel are dark, but actually there is light, as you said, as well as part of dying. And Rachel, thank you for all that you're doing. And we're really looking forward to the Sussex Beacon Hospice to be, up and running. And we'll come and visit you, I'm sure.
I'd love to have you here when we open. But yeah, and thank you for inviting us. And great to meet you as well, Simon.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Ro. Thank you.
And I'm going to thank our listeners as well. And listeners, if you want to share feedback, any questions you may have, or simply want to make a comment, please write to the viewsroom@gmail.com. Thank you to our outreach partners, My G Work, Proud HR, Outspoken Speakers, and Ageism is Never in Style. If you've enjoyed listening to this episode, please do share widely and amplify it as much as possible, because we want to ensure older queer voices are heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.